Joining us now on the line from Cleveland, Ohio is Dr. Michael Roizen. He is the Chief Wellness Officer at the Cleveland Clinic, and we are happy, Dr. Roizen, to welcome you to TVO tonight. How are you doing?
Great, Steve. Thank you very much. It's my privilege.
Not at all. I know there has been a certain amount of chuckling over the fact that in his short time in office, President Obama is starting to show flecks of gray on the side of his head, but it does raise some questions about bigger issues about stress in that job and whether that is any job that, any mere mortal can handle these days. Is the white hair on his head, in fact, a sign that the stress is getting to him?
We don't know that. One of the things that we don't know is why you get, if you will, your hair changes color. One of the factors is clearly lack of nourishment of the hair follicle. The hair follicle, believe it or not, each hair follicle has its own little artery, and those arterioles, as they're called, are affected by stress. They get narrower, and it's thought that may accelerate aging. We don't have any real obvious data in humans that occurs. We have some animal data that it occurs in animals, but we don't know in humans that, in fact, stress causes that, if you will, premature graying.
Well, let's follow this along. I'm going to read you an excerpt here from a book called The Mortal Presidency, Illness and Anguish in the White House by Robert Gilbert. And he argues that, quote, presidents of the United States have tended to die, that is, expire prematurely, either while in office or shortly after retirement from the White House. The position then surely would seem injurious to the health of those who hold it. Would you agree that being president these days is injurious to your health?
Well, we studied what we call the real age of presidents on getting into office and on leaving office, and almost invariably, everyone since Teddy Roosevelt got 2 years older for every year they were in office. So Carter was in office 4 years, he got 8 years older. If you will, the Clinton was in office 8 years, he got 16 years older during his time in office. The good news is they can recover it afterwards, but generally the statement is absolutely correct.
So just so I'm clear, I guess Clinton was about 46 when he started and then 54 by the time he got out. Are you saying that by the time he got out he really wasn't 54, but in fact he was, 62?
Well, he started out about 6 years younger, and he ended up about 10 years older when he got out. Remember, he shortly after he left office had a heart attack and had heart bypass surgery. So he actually did age that much during his period of time. We now think, we don't have hard data on him as much as we'd like. You get a lot of hard data while the president's in office because their medical records are often released, at least in substantial part. But in his period in office, he aged 16 years.
And what measurement are you actually looking at when you conclude that, in fact, a president ages 2 years for every year the rest of us age?
Well, there are 191 factors that have been shown in at least 4 studies in humans to contribute to aging, 149 of which we get to alter. It's free at a website called realage.com, and we just plugged in as much data as we have on each of the presidents. On Clinton, we have about 40 of those 149 factors we were able to plug in, everything from his blood pressure to his cardiovascular function, his food habits you can see a lot of, his exercise habits, whether he smoked or not, even his friends. We even got reports on whether he flossed or not. So there are a lot of factors that are released to the public that you find. And what the major thing that overwhelms everything else for them is their unremitting stress. For some of us, we get stressed, we have to pick up kids, we run here, we run there. Those we deal with and don't age us. It's the unremitting stress. In his case, it was some of the, if you will, the attempted impeachment of him, some of the financial problems that the country was having or not having while he was in office, some of the other factors that don't let up. They're continuous. For Obama, if you look at it, we're fighting 2 wars. He's got the most major economic problem clearly since the Great Depression. He has health care. You know, everything he does, whether it's positive or negative, people will attack it. So even when he didn't do something relating to the if you will, Iran events or the presidential election in Iran, whether he did something or not, he was attacked mercilessly, if you will, for either not doing something or doing something. So the president is in this unenviable position, and especially with the 24/7 news cycle now, that he is constantly being harassed.
Now, before I ask you a follow-up question on what, in fact, that 24/7 nature of stress does to a president's body, there was an obvious follow-up from your previous answer, and I need to know. So did Clinton floss?
It was reported that he did floss, so yes.
Thankfully, I can go to bed tonight knowing that. All right. How about what, in fact, does happen to the body when, as you describe it, this 24/7, unrelenting kind of stress, is visited upon somebody all the time?
Well, you see it in two things with the prior president. You see it in higher blood pressure, which leads to stroke, heart attack, aging of their arteries in general, and you see it in weight gain. So Lyndon Johnson's the classic example. He ate as he went through presidency, and he would tell his chef, I only want to eat this much. And then he'd eat that much, and he'd go back to the refrigerator and double that portion and triple it. So he gained weight and high blood pressure during office. And so his chef, in fact, got so annoyed at him at one point that the chef fired him. He said, from now on, you're going to eat what I put in front of you, and we're going to not eat anymore. We don't know what happened to that chef after he said that to him. But it is traditional that they gain weight, and they gain weight because of the stress, and they develop high blood pressure because of that. They don't, in fact, get adequate treatment for it. It apparently is so severe that it overwhelms a lot of things. So they end up with heart disease, as Clinton did, or strokes, as a number of other presidents have had.
Now, obviously, some presidents, as some people, are able to deal with stress better than others are. President Obama, I think obviously tons of people have observed, seems to be one of the coolest cats who's ever had that job. He seems very, very measured, and with the exception of the white flecks, doesn't look as if the stress is really getting to him so far. What qualities, are you able to determine what qualities a president may have that enable him to deal with the stress better than those who, say, don't have those same qualities?
We don't know the president so much, but we know in general. It is people who have friends and are able to talk about their problems with their friends. That's one of the problems with the White House. He's got specific advisors, but when it gets towards the end of the term, apparently the advisors and everybody else is asking for favors, so he ends up with no confidant other than his spouse. So apparently it is good marriages from the president's standpoint. It is also having those confidants and having ways of releasing stress. Eisenhower, as you know, played an average of half a round of golf for every day he was in office in the last 4 years. So it is those things that apparently are able to ease stress.
And yet, despite all the golf, Eisenhower had, I think, a heart attack and a stroke while he was president, so sometimes even that doesn't help.
Right. He actually had 4 heart attacks and had 14 cardiac arrests during office.
Oh my!
And so he had a lot. I mean, the classic example is I think it's Warren Harding, who had disabling stroke while in office, but no one knew about it. We didn't have a 24/7 news cycle, and they kept it from the public, and even from his vice president. So it was only his wife and a couple of aides who were able to run the presidency for the last 2 years of his office.
And I gather Grover Cleveland had cancer of the mouth or the jaw or something like that, which they didn't find out for another quarter century. This kind of thing happens occasionally, I guess, doesn't it?
It does, and so when you say, would anyone want that job? Well, first of all, just imagine being questioned essentially 24/7, being looked at by cameras. You can't go any place without cameras following you, I don't think, as a president. And then having, if you will, this unremitting stress. It's a very tough job.
Sure. Now, what about, obviously, President of the United States we think of as the most stressful job anywhere in the world. But take another country. I mean, would being Prime Minister of Canada, would being the President of France, it doesn't have to be the biggest country in the world, But would the stresses essentially be the same, and the effect on the body also be essentially the same?
Yes. Unfortunately, the answer is being the president, being the decision maker and the focus of attention in a country makes it likely that you age. When we studied this, and we did study France and England, it looked like their prime ministers or their presidents had the same process going on. They would age and they would get hypertension. So it looks like that same process going on. We didn't formally study Canada, unfortunately.
What about being the head of a multinational company, for example? Would the same effects be in place?
You know, at the Cleveland Clinic, both in Canada and in the United States, we take care of a lot of CEOs and even Nobel Prize winners, et cetera. And what they lose is the key thing which we would advise Obama to keep, because CEOs do it too. They lose their friends. When you're a CEO, you end up with very few friends, and if you don't have a tight family that you can confide in, you age a great deal. So it is keep your friends and keep your family, and make sure you use them as your confidants, because otherwise you will age faster. And that it is a hazard of being the chief executive officer of a major company.
We're always told, though, that presidents, prime ministers, they don't have friends, they have interests, and that friends are meant to be sacrificed in the interest of, for example, avoiding a scandal, keeping the government going, that kind of thing. Are you saying that they need to revisit that idea?
I think you need, you know, throughout, in all of the data and all the studies we have of how do you deal with unremitting stress, it is friends that are the key. It isn't interests, it is friends. The passion for work, important, but friends, much more important in dealing with stress.
Okay. One more thing on stress before I move on and do another quote from that Gilbert book that I mentioned earlier. How does stress, can you make good decisions if you are under this kind of unrelenting stress?
What you're saying is, can your brain function normally to be rational under unremitting stress? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, one of the characteristics of a group of physicians has that ability, and we're happy they do. Surgeons, one of the characteristics when you look back at what makes a great surgeon, it is what we call self-denial. It is being able to, in fact, get the stress out of your life in making moment-to-moment decisions. Doesn't mean you don't get the aging effect of the stress, but it means that you can make the decision at a key moment that is important without the stress affecting the quality of that decision.
I mean, part of the reason I asked the question is that many people have observed, obviously, that the White House is a very stressful place to be, and George W. Bush, the decider, they would argue, made some pretty terrible decisions, and one wonders if you connect those dots, whether he made those bad decisions because, frankly, he wasn't up to the stress of the job. Can you come to that conclusion?
No. We just don't know how he handled stress, how he handled friends, and whether some of what you consider bad decisions, he may have considered perfectly rational decisions for his inputs, if you will. So I think it is a very stressful job. Some people don't make good decisions under stress, but one of the characteristics, if you get to be, in the United States, if you get to be a president, you've gone through a heck of a trial in the campaigns. Those campaigns are about as stressful, and I've often thought maybe the function of a campaign is to see if you can deal with stress so that you can be a president and make good decisions under stressful conditions.
Understood. Let's finish up in our last few minutes here with a chapter we're calling Staying Healthy. And once again, I'll read an excerpt from Robert Gilbert's book, The Mortal Presidency, in which he refers to one of President Kennedy's aides giving us this revealing glimpse into the president's so-called restful visits to Hyannisport and Palm Beach. Wherever he went, Kennedy was linked by telephone to the White House switchboard, guarded by the Secret Service, and discreetly followed by one of an alternating team of Army warrant officers carrying in a slender black case the secret codes by which the presidential order for nuclear retaliation would be given. Wherever he went, he received the same daily CIA briefing from a military or other aide, and read most of the same daily newspapers which were flown into him if necessary. Wherever he went, he kept in constant touch with Washington, signed bills and executive orders, and conferred on or contemplated current crises. Now, you've referred to the fact that this job follows you wherever you go and all of the time. Is it possible for a president, for his own health, to get away from any of this at all?
You just signaled the process. It is for those 2, 4, 8 years, whatever it is that you're in that office, you don't get a vacation. You know, people say, well, Eisenhower was on the golf course. Well, he was followed by Secret Servicemen on the golf course with that same darn case, if you will, and had to do all that reading. Bill Clinton used to run, but if you notice, who were his running mates? It wasn't a bunch of friends, it was Secret Service agents. One of whom was carrying something like that case in the red phone. So it is a job that, you know, it is something that those of us who watch it from the outside and who try and say what aging does to the president, when you look at it, it is a job without relief for the 8 years.
And one of the fascinating things about it, I guess, is that even though you are constantly surrounded by people, it's a lonely job, isn't it? What effect does that have on you?
Well, friends are the absolute key for dealing with stress and for even relating specific decisions. And if you don't have friends, you know, obviously Clinton had, I mean, Clinton is the quintessential example. Obviously, at one point, he and his wife weren't on exactly perfect speaking terms. And so who were his friends? I mean, he didn't have very many at that point who he could rely on and who didn't want a specific favor from him. So it is a very tough thing to get away from, if you will, that 24/7 stress period. And you've really got to be very tough. And it unfortunately ages you. We just don't have any remedy for it, but we need presidents. I don't know how you deal without it.
Well, your staff, of course, will book up every single second of every day of your waking hours if you let them. So I guess the follow-up question to that is, if you're the president and you want to stay healthy, how do you stay healthy?
Well, as I got to tell, if you will, or relate to President Obama, keep your BlackBerry. Don't let anyone but your friends know the number. Make sure the Secret Service allows you to keep it, and have a secret basketball court someplace where you keep your friends coming in so you can play, and don't let them admit to anyone they're your friends.
Yeah, that's easy to say. It's hard to do, though, isn't it? Mind you, he has managed to keep the BlackBerry, hasn't he? So he's doing, on Roizen's top 10 list, he's doing #1 pretty well, isn't he?
He's at least doing that. We don't know. I mean, you know, you'd say, we know from, if you will, the public reports that he's working pretty hard. We know that he's working till 10 or 11 every night, and that whether Sasha and Malia are getting to see him on regular schedule, one day he was a soccer dad, but we don't think many more days was he a soccer dad.
You got to admit, though, the commute is pretty easy. I think it's about 30 seconds from the bedroom to downstairs, so he's got that going in his favor. Dr. Roizen, it's very good of you to join us on the line from Cleveland, Ohio. Thanks so much for this.
Thank you, Steve.